Why, hello, YouTube. Welcome back, and this is BalorMage, and we are going to go over our Corrupting Fever Glad. Last we saw, we were in full MF gear, and we were MFing towers. And I decided that was a little bit too slow, and I wanted to farm up a Headhunter. So, I made the unfortunate decision of having to do Nemesis 3 farming. This video isn't necessarily about Nem 3 farming. I will make a separate video about how I was juicing my maps and what I was doing for Nem 3. But there are also a bunch of guides around for how to do that. So if you need to know about that right now, just search for it or wait for the next video. But for now, what we're going to go over is this character and how I geared it in the minimal amount of money I could do to give it just enough to be able to do Nem 3 farming, so that I had to spend the least amount of money and I could just do my Nem 3 farming and farm up my Headhunter. Now, farming the Headhunter in this method, I started already having 1.5 doctor cards when I started, but with no money left over. So I had 1.5 doctor cards to start. I did 3 8-hour streams. These were 8 hours according to OBS, so that includes my intro, that includes any time I go AFK, that includes any time I'm sitting in my hideout talking to chat and being generally inefficient. And this took 3 days to go from 3 8-hour days to go from 1 doctor card to 8 doctor cards, and obviously turning it into a Headhunter. So incredibly efficient, but it needs to be more powerful than the MF version. So we're going to go over what we had in our path of building and then show you the character in game as well. Boom. So here is our path of building. Now, let's start with the cost. The overall cost of this build, everything including inspired learnings, was around about 30 exalts. I did not have a Headhunter at the time. Obviously, I farmed the Headhunter, but including the inspired learnings, it was 30 exalts. So, our damage is only 1.1 mil. We are still doing our 5-link trick, where I just have increased duration instead of an actual damage support. If I did put an actual damage support, which would be life tap, it would get significantly more damage. Not even that much more damage. The problem is the life cost goes up to 8k, and I couldn't afford that. Now, the trick everyone else is using is obviously stuff is free when you focus, but that is inconvenient for me. I don't want to wait at the beginning of a map. I often let it fall off while mapping because I'm not very good, and I just couldn't have it costing more than my life and waiting on a focus craft. Also, I bought this amulet for 1 exalted orb because somebody had crafted it and corrupted it with no catalysts, no life roll, an empty suffix they hadn't even crafted on. I assumed this person did this by accident and then was very upset with it. So they sold it on for 1 exalt and did their craft again. And since I was looking for the minimal, cheapest way to do anything, I bought it for 1 exalt. That being said, you can buy ones better than this for 3. So I've based the entire price around this being 3 exalts and not 1 because I got very lucky. Still under 30 chaos. Right. Next thing, we do have a +2 Skin of the Lords here. I mean, they've all got +2 on them. We can be a little forgiving because the increased duration is not important. It was nice to have, but if that's an empty slot, it doesn't really matter. With Corrupting Fever lasting 8 seconds on its own, or 11 seconds with increased duration, it is nice to have, but in order to get a Skin of the Lords cheap, you can just make that any color and you could leave it empty and it wouldn't matter. So if you can get a red, great. If you can't get a red, move on. All you need to worry about when you do that is to not get a keystone that would ruin the build. So Leaf Shade was great. That was nice. It was good. That was something actually useful. That was this one over here with 50% less damage taken for damage over time if you start taking damage over time, but it honestly doesn't matter what it is. What you need is for it to not be something that ruins the build. So Avatar of Fire, CI, Zealot's Oath, like, you know, something that would ruin it, you can't have that. But as long as it's not something that would ruin it, you don't care what's on it. Not important. I've still got the same 5C wand. I didn't need to get any better than this. Super cheap. I bought some random pair of gloves. Physical damage over time multiplier on them. That was it. Just some resistances and some life. Not even a good pair. 30C gloves. Right? I got onslaught boots. This is like the only suppression I have in the build. You don't need suppression. This was just onslaught to get me around quicker. Again, these were maybe, I think, a little under an X. I did need the dex, so I chose to get some dex and onslaught on the boots. That was it. Same deal with my shield. It was very, very cheap. I needed stats, so I put int on it. And I got the +1 level of all physical gems. So the big thing here is that we needed to scale our corrupting fever up higher to be able to do Nem 3. So we end up with a level 31 corrupting fever. This is not as high as it can go. This was all about what corners could I cut and how could I make the build as cheap as possible and still be able to do Nem 3. So we did that. We got a little bit of damage over time and resistance on a ring. That was the 1x, I think. And we did get a vulnerability on hit with just crafted life and some resistances on a topaz ring. Again, that was only an X. Everything there was relatively cheap. We have the same cluster that we had before. Same physical cluster, which is nice. Same chaos mediums we had. We did go a little harder and paid about 60 chaos per jewel that we put in, and we do have quite a lot of jewels, and they are quite impactful. I did not get a Watcher's Eye. Watcher's Eyes are too expensive for this build when I was looking to just farm up a Headhunter and then move on from it, so I didn't feel like investing in a Watcher's Eye. But all of these jewels were relatively cheap, 60C a piece, but there's a decent amount of them, right? So they all add up over time. But this is how it ended up being. We went from a pretty low amount of DPS up to 1.1 million, and that's Cirrus DPS, which we're obviously not fighting Cirrus, we're clearing maps, so it's more like 1.3. It was smooth, it was tanky enough, it almost never died in Nem 3 farming, and yeah, a few days and boom, Headhunter. I will link this in the description of the video in case anyone wants to move on from that. And there'll be a separate video, like I said, about how I was juicing my Nem 3 tropical islands. That'll probably come out tomorrow. So if you're interested in that and you want to make sure you see it, do hit subscribe. Don't forget to like the video, do the commenting things for the YouTube algorithm gods, because that is how we get paid. All right. I hope everybody enjoyed this build. I had a lot of fun with it, especially for its budget, but we are moving on to probably Winter Orb. So Winter Orb will be the next build guide that we see coming out of here. And I will see everybody later. Goodbye.